Isn't Song of Solomon kind of weird when it comes to wisdom literature in the Bible? Because I know it's not just me. Like, somebody else has to, like, kind of look at wisdom literature in the Bible and then just look at Song of Solomon. It's like, that that doesn't fit, right? That doesn't fit with the wisdom of Solomon. Because um, here, right, we have the the book of Psalms. If my pen wants to work, if the ink in my pen wants to stop spilling, and instead decide to start working. No, it's being mean to me today. Let me see if I can get another one. Hold on. All right, we've got a actually working pen now. So back on what I was saying. The Book of Psalms is the second book of wisdom in the traditional Bible. In our not a traditional Bible, sorry, in our now American Standard Bible, or typical Bible. So here we got the Book of Psalms. Here we got the Book of Psalms, right? And it's a pretty great introduction to the literature that you can find in the wisdom section of the Bible, because at the start you already have kind of prophecies of the Messiah, right? In chapter 1, the whole spiel is about that there's like this idol image of a righteous good person. There's this existing image of a faithful good person, someone who does not sit alongside the wicked, who doesn't sit alongside the wicked, who does not commit acts with the wicked. He doesn't interact with the wicked. Instead, he dedicates his life purely to God's word. And what the first chapter says is, hey, here we got, this person. This person's like a tree, right? Like a tree of life. Wisdom. And who is this person? Well, Psalm chapter 2 immediately goes on talking about this Son of God, this King who will return to Mount Zion. He will go to Jerusalem. He will set up his kingdom there, and the nations will fall before him, and he will be deemed as king of everything. And God says, "You are my son, right? You are my son. I have begotten you." And have some respect for the son, yet lest he be angry. So this Son of God seems to be, the ideal, like who this ideal image of a person is. It's this Son of God, right? So here we got the first two chapters already summarized, right? And then the next from chapter 3 all the way to chapter 150, we have this large collection of prophecies, specifically about the Messiah. All right. So we've got prophecies of the Messiah. Then we got actual songs, actual poems. Then we got some woes. of David, to be specific, which were used to kind of be an image of how we should woe and repent to God and how we should cry out to God. So David basically is setting up an example for future generations. So in times of trouble, we could use David's woes, his poems of sadness, to basically, to cry out to God, to plead with, to basically plead. And then we just got like some worship, right? Some worship, praise God, songs about God's mercy, His love, and that's basically that's a pretty good introduction to the wisdom literature. We got prophecies of the Messiah, how we should live our lives. We got poems, we got woes, worship. It's basically a step-by-step it's a step-by-step process into getting in a closer relationship with God, by understanding who He is through the Son, by singing to Him, by praising Him, by crying out to Him. Basically, the Psalms is like a prayer book, basically, an introduction on how to get closer to God. And wisdom is key to getting closer to God. At least that's what young lady Proverbs says. So now we move on to the book of Proverbs. Imagine Proverbs as a person. Proverbs would be like, let's say, a young woman, a young teacher who is wise and understanding in her ways. Basically, a very smart, very intuitive young woman. And there we go. Lady Proverbs. What does Lady Proverbs tell you about wisdom? Well, Lady Proverbs says, be wise if you want to connect to God, and that wisdom will give you success. So, Lady Proverbs basically says, hey, be wise. If you're smart, if you believe, if you have faith in God, if you're smart, everything will go right for you. If you always make the right, wise, smart decision, everything will be successful. Everything will go great for you. But then you got someone arguing against that. Old man Ecclesiastes, who is like a more grumpy teacher. He's like the old man. He's the old man of the group. He's like the old retired teacher smoking a cigarette, who's basically done with life at every single moment. And what he says is that wisdom won't always lead to success. He states that while our English translation translates his word to useless, he actually says life is hevel. Life is like a smoke. Life is like a gas, which when you try to interact with when you try to interact with it, meld it into something that you want it to be, it just disappears from your hands. Old man Ecclesiastes is basically telling us, hey, if you try to control life, if you try to say, oh, if I'm wise and do this, everything will go well, life slips from your hands. You can't control it. Life, like smoke, is unpredictable. But there is some level of, he's kind of like this bittersweetness. He says that, hey, No matter what you do, no matter what good things you do, no matter what success you may have from being wise, that all the good parts, all the rewards that come from your decisions will be passed on to someone who didn't even work for that. And Old Man Ecclesiastes says, I've had woman, I've had vineyards, riches, palaces. I've seen the most happy, joyful. I've been to the most happy, joyful, fun places. I've drunk the best of wine and slept with the hottest of women. That doesn't bring you happiness. Trying to control hands is like chasing the trying to control life is like chasing after the wind. There's no point. You're all gonna die. No matter what new thing you achieve, no matter what thing you have done, everything always stays the same under the sun. You'll just do the same old boring things until you return to the dust from which you were made. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be wise. Be wise. Believe in God. Just lower your expectations a bit. Things may not always go your way, but in the end, it's best to trust God. And Job is kind of the climax of this three-parter of wisdom. Job is the one he's like the young student who gets the answer. He's the young nerdy student who gets the answer. And what Job says, give me a second here. What Job teaches us is that we won't always be wise. We won't always understand the why behind things. We can't fit, like Old Man Ecclesiastes said, we can't just we can't just have predetermined paths based off our wisdom or good acts. Job is saying, hey, we can't always determine the good that happens. We can't always, our expectations may not always happen. And the best thing to do is to have faith. And that's the wisest thing you can do. We won't always have earthly knowledge about the why of things. But the wisest thing that we can do is to have faith in God. And He will lead you to success. So it's a mesh of what Lady Proverbs and Old Man Ecclesiastes says. Old Man Ecclesiastes says that, we won't always be wise. Things won't always go the way we want them to go simply because of how we behave. Life slips from your hands. But if we trust God and have faith in Him, that brings us real wisdom. And that real wisdom brings us success. So he's kind of like the one who shoves the two theories together to make one understandable, real confirmed point. And then you have all this. You have Psalms being this book of worship teaching us how to get closer to God. And we have Lady Proverbs, Old Man Ecclesiastes, and Young Man Job basically all solving the question of how to get closer to God through wisdom. And then you just have Song of Solomon, which is literally just a sex book. Doesn't that transition kind of sound weird? You have this book of poems teaching you how to get closer to God through prayer, through communicating with God. You have this three-parter story of Lady Proverbs, Old Man Ecclesiastes, and Young Man Job, basically all trying to figure out how to get closer to God through wisdom, and what wisdom really means in the end. And then we have God exposing some king's DMs. What's up with that? Song of Solomon is one of the strangest books that I assure you, it's up there with Leviticus. and Revelation. It's like those two books that nobody ever wants to read. It's up there with the minor prophets, like even just the prophets in general. It's up there with those books of the Bible nobody wants to read. And I dare say that this is the most this is the weirdest book to ever be in the Bible. Why is Song of Solomon? Why is this random sex song made by the king of Jerusalem? Why is this shoved in with all the wisdom literature? Well, to answer this. The song is of Solomon, of course. So we must go back to his character. Solomon's character is introduced as this young king who all he wants is to be smart in his decisions and to carry on his father's legacy. So what does he do? He chases after wisdom, specifically by asking God for it. And then you look at Song of Solomon, and you see this man who supposedly should be Solomon. Yeah, you got this guy chasing after this girl. And if you remember, in the book of Proverbs, wisdom is shown by a woman. That's specifically why I decided to use Lady Wisdom for the character of wisdom, because why I decided to choose Lady Proverbs as, like, that's why I decided to choose a woman to describe Proverbs, because that's what Proverbs is. That's what the wisdom in Proverbs is. Like, the wisdom in Proverbs is provided by two characters, a wise king and Lady Wisdom. So the first 9 chapters basically come from this king talking to his royal sons. And you get a bunch of other stuff in the rest of the chapters. But sprinkled throughout these, we get interventions from Lady Wisdom, who we later figure out is God himself, is a representation of God's wisdom, at least. So we got Solomon chasing after wisdom, and in the book, we got Solomon chasing after this woman, who we know, thanks to Proverbs, is a symbol of wisdom. And there's a verse in the Bible talking about how Solomon's wisdom allowed for every Israelite to live under their own fruit tree. What does that mean? Go back to Genesis. The man and the woman lust after wisdom. They try getting it in their own hands. They try to be wise in their own eyes. And they snatch the fruit, and their intimacy between God and between one another is just absolutely shattered. So, and why did this happen? Because of, like, the fruit tree of knowledge, right? But there's also another fruit tree, the fruit tree of life, a fruit tree that provides actual wisdom. And that fruit tree should have been picked from, because that represents God's wisdom. If God's wisdom, if Adam and Eve decided to live by God's wisdom, they would eat from the tree of life every single day. The tree of life is a representation of when we accept God's wisdom. And here in the book of Kings, here we have the writer literally saying that thanks to Solomon, everyone gets to live in God's wisdom. So, what is the point of Song of Solomon? Because there's a lot of garden imagery. There's a lot of imagery of the woman chasing the man and the man chasing the woman. So what does this all mean? Well, this is my personal interpretation. There are many theories out there, but my personal interpretation is that this is a representation of how to fix the relationship between God and man. In the book of Psalms, it was a guide to help us get closer to God. And in the 3-parter of wisdom, it was teaching us about wisdom and how that can help us get closer to God and become stronger with God. And Song of Solomon is the last book here in the American Basic English version. Song of Solomon is the last for a reason, because it is the epitome of all of this that is going on. So Song of Solomon, here we have the resolution. The woman, aka wisdom, is constantly searching for the man, humanity. God's wisdom is always trying to lead us in the right direction. That's basically our moral compass, right? Kind of, that motivation to, do the right thing. That's basically Lady Wisdom. And the man is also chasing for the woman. We want to be wise, but not in our, we want to be wise in our own eyes, but that's not what we should be doing. We should be chasing after the woman But the correct woman, because there's Lady Folly and Lady Wisdom. Most of us, when we try to be wise in our own eyes, are starting to chase after the wrong woman. We're chasing after Lady Folly. But if we chase after Lady Wisdom, we're chasing after God's wisdom, the true wisdom, the right wisdom. And that's kind of what I see, that intermingling going on, and like that those first 7 chapters of back and forth between the man and the woman are all about. And it represents both. And then at the end in chapter 8, we got this poem about how strong their love is, and how in the end they end up getting together. Or we come back, so the man finds the woman. And I love the imagery of this, because it also touches back to that thing I mentioned, that the intimacy between the man and the woman had broken apart. And Song of Solomon is showing us that when we search after God's wisdom, we can repair both the relationships that have been broken between man and woman, but also between human and God. And that's why I think Song of Solomon, despite being one weird book, may have more symbolism behind it than we may have originally thought. Maybe there's a reason why it's at the very end of the wisdom section, because it's supposed to show us what these books should be what the books prior should have been doing to us, how they should have been helping us through this quest. We search for God's wisdom when we read these books, and we find God's wisdom, and God's wisdom is looking for us. And when we accept to read these books and we understand the meaning behind them, God's wisdom finds us. And when we are wise by believing in God, just like Job says, when we believe in God and are wise like God, and we live in God's wisdom, we can fix the relationship between man and woman, but also between human and God. And that's the message I have for today. I decided to change up the way I did these a little bit. Instead of just talking for an hour straight, I decided to doodle a bit in my sketchbook to kind of have a visual idea of what I'm talking about. This is a bit of a shorter one, but it's an important message nonetheless, because Song of Solomon has been on my mind and bugging me quite a bit recently. Well, that's all I have for today. May God bless all of you, and may you all have a wonderful morning, afternoon, night, midnight, whatever. God bless.